welcome to OTel Q&A. We've got folks from Embrace here. So I guess why don't you introduce yourselves?
I guess I can start. My name is Eliab
Right.
Sisay. I lead product for our data collection and ingestion team here at Embrace. My team is responsible for a suite of mobile SDKs, so across iOS, Android, Unity, Flutter, and React Native.
And I'm Austin Emmons. I'm a developer on the iOS team, or the leads part of the iOS SDK development. And talks to the other teams just about OpenTelemetry in general, but my main focus is Apple platforms.
Awesome. And can one of you tell us like what does Embrace do?
Yeah, totally. So we are a mobile observability company. We provide developers with SDKs that integrate into their mobile apps to monitor performance in real time. Our main goal is to help developers keep their apps running smoothly by proactively identifying and resolving issues, really with the objective of improving the overall user experience. We're heavily invested in OpenTelemetry, which I know we'll kind of dig into a little bit later. But we began that transition about 9 months ago, and it's really helped us provide our customers with a more unified, comprehensive view of app performance from what's happening client side on the user's mobile device all the way to the backend services that power those experiences. And so by doing that, we really enable developers to understand the full impact of any issues and optimize their apps more effectively. We've open sourced all of our SDKs that I talked about earlier, and we would encourage everyone to go check those out in our GitHub repo, play around with them, and we'd love feedback.
Awesome. And it's really cool that, as a mobile observability company, you are basically dog fooding, I guess, by using OpenTelemetry. And it's cool that it sounds like you didn't start in that direction, but you moved in that direction. And I can't wait to dig into that a little bit more. Before we get into that, can you describe the architecture that Embrace uses and any of the programming languages that are being used, like deployment environment? Like, what's your tech landscape look like?
I could take that one. So being a SDK, I focus mostly on the iOS side of things. And as we took on this journey, we kind of rewrote the iOS SDK with a Swift first approach, and that takes on a Swift package manager project structure. The Android side is similar. It takes on the Kotlin first approach. There's a lot of existing Java in that SDK, and they do a really good job at making sure that the interface on the Android side, kind of, if you're a Kotlin developer, you should be familiar with it. If you're calling in from a Java, a piece of Java code, then that interface should just feel like Java there as well. And that's the SDKs. Our backend, though, it's standard microservice architecture. We deploy using Argo CD and primarily run in a Kubernetes cluster. And then we have a couple of different data stores depending on how we're accessing the data that include ClickHouse and Cassandra. And then the code for the backend is mostly Go with some Python, sprinkled in here and there.
Cool, awesome. And then and now that we've got some of the background, I'm really excited to hear about your OpenTelemetry integration. So first off, how did you learn about OpenTelemetry, and then why did you decide to integrate OpenTelemetry into the product?
Yeah, so I think as recently as 5-6 years ago, there was a variety of open standards that kind of led to OTel. I think most notably Open Census and Open Tracing. And once those combined into OpenTelemetry, we just saw the community really coalesce around that as the standard for modern observability practices. And it really, and we decided to use OpenTelemetry because that fit perfectly with our vision of modernizing observability through open standards. So OpenTelemetry providing a transparent, portable, flexible way to collect data, we felt was really essential for creating a unified observability framework that ties both the front end and the back end of applications. As we were talking to customers, we kept hearing that one of the biggest challenges that SREs and developer teams consistently faced was marrying insights from their user-facing web and mobile applications into their observability practice all up. And so I think in an ideal world, your front-end teams are collecting data about what's happening to the end user, the health of your end user experiences, and your back-end teams are collecting data about the health of infrastructure and services. And today it's common for those to be entirely separate tools. They don't share a common set of telemetry, aren't interoperable, and really prevent engineering teams from speaking the same language. And companies really want to work on what matters most, and it requires understanding where to invest their engineering resources to deliver the best user experiences. And so we really saw that as an opportunity. We wanted to help solve that challenge by collaborating with the OpenTelemetry community to drive the future of open standards for observability, specifically within our expertise of mobile. And our goal is to provide developers with a comprehensive view of their app's performance. So today we collect the full technical and behavioral details of every user session with our OpenTelemetry compatible SDKs, and users can even extend that instrumentation to any custom library in their app using OpenTelemetry signals, and then leverage our platform to contextualize the added instrumentation. And because we're using OpenTelemetry at the core of our SDKs, they can easily integrate with any backend of their choice or other observability tools, really giving users of our SDKs more flexibility to help them avoid being tied to one vendor. Now, of course, we think our product does some pretty cool stuff for mobile development teams in terms of workflow and helping them understand data and resolve things quickly. But really, we think, contributing to the community and helping mobile engineering teams modernize and helping SRE and DevOps teams be able to take that data and make sense of it as part of their entire system will ultimately empower them to build better, more resilient mobile apps.
Now, as a follow-up question, so you mentioned that you have like OpenTelemetry built into your SDKs. Do you have OpenTelemetry built into your core product as well?
So I would say the SDKs are our core product that our customers use. We also have a front-end dashboard.
Yeah, so front end is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I don't know. Also, can you speak to that? I'm more involved in the SDK side.
There are some like features that we have, like it's called data destinations, where we would collect metrics, or some of the metrics that we aggregate in our backend, we then export as OpenTelemetry signals. And so if you're not using the SDK and exporting the OpenTelemetry signals directly from a user's device, you might be sending data to us and then getting signals sent from our backend to wherever you configure, whatever other provider you might be using, to hopefully get the mobile data and your backend data in the same place.
Gotcha. And on a similar vein, like how do you interact with the telemetry that's coming from the applications and services in your organization?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of internal dashboards, and so we host our own Grafana instance, and can run reports, monitor the standard things that you would on a backend: uptime, response times, throughput, and we have all of that. Our DevOps team and backend teams have those monitors, and then me as a front end developer, and kind of or front end, an SDK developer, looking at how our customers use the product. I can pull reports and generate my own visualizations just to see, is this feature being used? How is it being used? How dirty is this data? If they're adding custom properties to their telemetry, then is that are they using it in quote unquote the correct way, or the way we would expect? And that is really insightful, just in terms of, okay, what documentation do we need to provide? How should we help people? Because sometimes if you're not looking at this data, then you're kind of at a loss, or you're just guessing. And so, yeah, for internal visibility, it's mostly internal Grafana dashboards, and running our own custom queries against those.
Awesome. And you know, you touched upon something that's so interesting and that we don't hear too much about in the context of observability, which is because we always think like observability helps us with troubleshooting, but observability also has that added benefit of like understanding how users interact with the system. And it's really, really cool that that is one of the things that you're doing with the telemetry data that you're gathering. So I wanted to call that out because I think that's very interesting and it's not very often talked about. All right, well, on to some meteor stuff. When when you first decided to implement OpenTelemetry in your SDKs, what were some of the challenges that you encountered?
Yeah, I mean, it was a process, not that we really had to convince ourselves. I think there was a big upswell and a big push. But just from a software point of view, it's tough to bring in a dependency to a project, because it's an unknown. At
Yeah.
that point in time, we were pretty unfamiliar with the OpenTelemetry Swift SDK itself, and that package. And so you have to bring it in, and there's some pushback on the team on, is this a dependency that we want to manage? We had to do our due diligence and some very tedious work to make sure that it fit how we expected it to. Make sure that any edge cases that we could think of, we could test and verify that it would work how we expected it to, and then also make sure that the performance, matched the scale that we were expecting. And so that's just very tedious work, especially when you're compressing it into some deadlines. But that's not really OpenTelemetry specific. That's just software and dependencies in general. So a challenge that was probably more specific to OpenTelemetry and observability is there. Our first instinct is when we instrument something, okay, let's go instrument and get it done. And you kind of have to catch yourself and say, oh, there's actually some prior art here, and so let's go search for these. And so, OpenTelemetry has the specification and the shape of the data model and what it should be. And then on top of that, there are all of these existing semantic conventions on how to use something and how to fit into a system. And, when you record a span that's a network request, what attributes you should use for that network request, where the URL goes, what the name of that span is. And so, because we are all in, we want to make sure we adhere to those to those semantic conventions. And it's tough when there's something very similar to what you're instrumenting, and you kind of have to have the discussions. Okay, is this something new? Is this the same? Should we leverage some of that and massage it a little bit to fit our needs? And that's also just kind of a tedious process to make sure that you're not stepping on any toes, but you're innovating and you're ultimately getting what you need done.
Yeah. And so when you did this, was it like, were you just updating your existing SDK, or was this like a complete rewrite when you made this decision to use OpenTelemetry?
So for the iOS team, we took the opportunity to rewrite into Swift. And so we had an existing SDK, observability SDK, that was mostly Objective-C. And being a larger shift, we were able to take this opportunity to really modernize it, and present it to Apple developers in the year 2024. Our Android team, their SDK was a little younger, if that's a term you can use for SDKs, but they were able to just maintain that same, the core code base, and then start shifting just the data model piece. And I think they also took the opportunity to modernize a lot of the architecture, because it changes a bunch when you're pulling in something like the OpenTelemetry SDK, and there's a lot of concepts in there that are very useful that you either massage to fit, or you just completely replace. And so it was different for each platform, but But yeah.
Cool. Now, I'm sure some folks who are listening in or who will listen to this in the future might be wondering also, like, OpenTelemetry does have already some SDKs tailored for mobile. So what's the advantage of using like the Embrace SDKs in that case?
Yeah, it's really just to simplify. We use the SDKs as dependencies. They underlie like what we do, and we're trying to add a layer on top of that to either make it a little more accessible. We manage a lot of the setup process for the SDK and try to simplify and streamline that. But then we also just try to minimize the overhead, the mental overhead of, okay, when I'm creating a span, what do I need to do? And hopefully that's one simple call into our SDK instead of, getting a tracer provider, building a tracer from that, taking that, and creating a span builder. And then once you have that span, so there's a couple of steps that the SDKs themselves have, and that's part of the spec, and there's good separation. There's reason for that separation. But we want to streamline that. And then that's just, if you're manually instrumenting things, we also want to add our own instrumentation that is mobile specific. That is the space that we're really in and we are experts of. And so when you're on an iOS device, there are things that occur there that is very specific to the iOS system or just users of that application that doesn't really apply to a backend system. And so we want to make sure that we can automate that instrumentation so that the users don't need to re-implement that or don't need to worry about it. And there's definitely a push for us to, if we create that instrumentation, to get it upstream because the goal is it benefits the community and then it's kind of off our maintenance burden. And so I mentioned there were 2 layers of the spec and those semantic conventions. The third on top of that is the Embrace semantic conventions that we're hopefully keeping as thin as possible, and we're pushing down into those OTel semantic conventions when we do create or think of new things.
That's awesome. So basically, like your SDK serve as a wrapper, but then also like any sort of things that you come up with that would benefit the community, then you contribute them back upstream, which is very cool. And I think that really speaks to the power of community because I think OpenTelemetry's success is due to the fact that we have so much support from various vendors who have all decided, no, we're not going to like try to do our own thing and work on an island. We're going to collaborate. So I think I really want to emphasize that stuff like this is extremely beneficial to the community. Now, when you switched your SDKs to using OpenTelemetry, what kind of benefits did you start seeing as a result?
For me, it was the common language, and it became very easy to discuss with people what OpenTelemetry is using, a trace, a span, a log, and what those, glossary items are. And one thing that really bugged me before is pretty much every vendor models these concepts but calls them kind of different things. And we, we're doing that before too, so we're at fault as well. And so being able to use just the common envelope and a common language, that was a massive benefit when we started switching to OpenTelemetry, just at the non-technical level.
Can I add one thing to that? I think from like an organizational perspective, it also helped to break down some silos for us internally, in that even across our SDKs, across the different platforms, prior to OpenTelemetry, our Swift SDK, our Android SDK, React Native, Unity, et cetera, were all kind of built with specific implementation details for those platforms in mind. And so kind of lived a little bit in a silo. But when you think about our customers, a customer of ours that has an iOS or an Android app, they build it specific to those platforms. But in terms of performance, their mobile teams want to understand that a consumer is having a great experience regardless of whether they're on an iOS device or an Android device. And I think building the underlying SDKs in silos internally or I should say the other way, when we moved to open telemetry, being able to use those common signals helped us break down those silos such that we could really focus on the insights that we're giving to our customers, which is really the ultimate value that we aim to provide.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a really great point. Now I want to switch gears a little bit, and because Austin, you mentioned that you make some contributions upstream for the to the client side telemetry SIG. What so tell us about your involvement with that SIG, and how did you start getting involved with that SIG as well?
Yeah, so I started attending the client side SIG probably 5 or 6 months ago, right at the beginning of 2024. My coworker Hanson had been joining those before me, and I had been joining the OTel Swift SIG meetings before that as well. And somebody just popped their head into a Swift SIG meeting and just said, "Hey, we have this client side SIG. There's not really any iOS representation. Would somebody please like volunteer to come hang out with us?" And I volunteered, and have been part of that SIG since, and joining every week. And it's been great. I mean, it's community, ideas are shared. We talk about what's going on, what proposals are happening, or what problems people are trying to solve. And when the time comes, that could just be unmuting yourself on the Zoom call and sharing an idea, or even just sharing, well, this is how it works for me. That could be going into the GitHub repos for some of the semantic conventions and just adding a comment and starting the discussion there, or responding and continuing the discussion there. Or it could be going into those the semantic convention repos and proposing some new things. And so Hanson has done a better job than I have, but he's led some semantic convention proposals for things that are mobile specific or client side specific. Some things like a user session as something that's a little formalized and standardized a little bit more than it is. Or a big thing for mobile apps is when a mobile app crashes, how do we model that as telemetry? And now that the events, the standalone event kind of data model has taken shape in the spec, there's a semantic convention proposal around modeling client-side crashes as an event. And so that'll be very useful because we deal with crash reporting as well at Embrace. And to formalize that and say, okay, here's how other people interpret crash reports. That gives that flexibility to send that data anywhere. And so it's again ridding ourselves of that vendor lock-in, because it's burdensome when you have it.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And so when like in terms of like starting to attend those OTel meetings, did you start doing that when you when the decision was made to like start using OTel internally, like to move the SDKs to using OTel? Like when did that come about?
I would say the decision was made when we started to switch. Is like, okay, we want to take this on. We want to be part of the community. I procrastinated a little bit just because I'm a person, and I didn't actually start joining until the beginning of the year. But that's just the realistic approach, I guess. And it's tough because you don't think that you have anything to contribute, and so there's a imposter syndrome that happens, and it takes a bit to rid yourself of that. And I'm here to tell you, rid yourself of that. Please join. We love hearing voices from all types of people using the tools that are provided. And so just come and watch. You can just hang out and chat, and then if something that comes up that you're comfortable with, then unmute yourself and join the chat verbally. And so yeah, that was kind of how it came about, I guess.
That's great, and thank you for calling that out as well specifically, because I think it's so common when people join open source projects, like You're right. The imposter syndrome is very real. It's very scary. You are being so vulnerable there, and especially when you join a group that seems to be like very well established and is it appears to be full of very intelligent people, and then you start thinking, oh my God, am I, am, am I worthy of this? And the answer, as you said, it's yes, you are. You are
Absolutely, yeah.
worthy of it. Yeah, everyone has a contribution to make, and it can be any kind of contribution. I mean, I can't emphasize enough, like so often I have past me has been like, using something from an open source project, and I'll like be following whatever in the documentation, and the docs are wrong, and my first reaction is to be mad. Oh my God, these idiots don't know what they're doing. And you know what, like, turn that frown upside down, because like what you should be doing, if you notice an issue in the documentation, if there's a boo-boo, if something is wrong, there's nothing that prevents you from filing a pull request to fix that documentation, to prevent other people from getting frustrated from it being wrong. So, I mean, that is the simplest thing that you can do, and it makes such a huge impact. So it doesn't have to necessarily be code. It can be documentation, and it can be a minor correction. So that's my little PSA there.
Yeah, that
All
was
right.
exactly our approach too. So it was good. It
Awesome.
was like,
Awesome.
we want some first issues. Let's go read the documentation. Is there anything that we can adjust or make more clear? So
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's so great. I love hearing these stories, and I feel like these are the types of things that we just need to keep repeating over and over in our community, and tell people, yes, this is a great way to contribute. We talked about the benefits that you saw with integrating OpenTelemetry into your SDKs. What are some of the challenges that you've seen in OpenTelemetry, especially like in the mobile space, like now that you've dipped your toes a little bit more into that in the community?
um, I would say that the biggest challenge that we faced is really, we're this layer above the Open Telemetry SDK, and we are trying to streamline the process of getting into observability. And it's mostly because mobile developers just aren't familiar with this territory. They might, what's interesting is a lot of developers are, and there are a lot of existing tools out there that will log events and things, but we're still trying to just flatten the learning curve for observability for people. And so a lot of the challenge is just educating and figuring out, okay, what clicks for people? Why is this valuable? Why is this useful? And then going from there, and then educating them on how do you use our product specifically. And so that's probably the one of the biggest non-technical challenges. The biggest challenge is that in the mobile space, the environment is just chaotic. It's something an app developer does not control. This is not a server in a box on some air conditioned shelf that you have on key and lock. It is in somebody's pocket. Hopefully, it could be on a nightstand. You have no idea on the network status. You have no idea how much battery is left on that device, or how angry that operating system is, and whether or not it's just going to kill your app for who knows what reason. And so the variability is ever present, and we need to be able to recover if anything goes wrong. So we have to handle things like, okay, we're trying to write stuff locally to disk so we can recover this data, but there's no disk space. What do we do? The battery is at 2%. What do we do? And it's just a little more hectic than you would expect or hope for if you're an app developer. And really the worst thing is if you're an app developer that's worried about performance, these things are out of your control, but the user is going to blame you if the app is not performing well. And so if they are on 2% battery and they're rushing to call a car to get to wherever they need to be, you need to make sure that they can complete that operation before the system just like, okay, I'm done, time to sleep. And so yeah, it's just crazy with what we do.
Yeah, it's definitely a whole different ball game in the mobile space compared to like the non-mobile space where I guess it's a little less chaotic. It feels like more unknowns in the mobile space that you're having to deal with, right?
Yeah, and we're monitoring more than just the application's performance as well. There's just how the user is interacting with this application, and what their behavior is something that you don't really have to deal with if it's, if you are in a microservice architecture. There's very consistent entry points, very consistent exit points um, in any client side application, not just mobile specific, but even in a web browser. You know, the user might be doing something on the page that you don't know how they got there. They came in with state that you didn't expect, and so now you need to understand, you know, how did you actually get to this issue? I can't reproduce. It works on my machine, but that's not an excuse you can use. So.
Yep, absolutely. Now, switching back to like, talking about contributing to OpenTelemetry, you mentioned getting started in contributing. Now that you've been doing it for several months, how has it been? Like, one of the things that our SIG does is we want to understand what the contribution experience is for OpenTelemetry, so we can provide that kind of feedback back to the SIGs, to really improve that, right? Because if we don't, if they're not aware of the feedback, what can they do to improve? So what are some of the tell us the good, the bad, the ugly, that you've experienced with becoming a contributor.
So it's good. I don't really have any bad or ugly, which maybe that's just me. But with joining the Swift SIG, I think it was like a week or two in, and these are weekly meetings. So my second or third meeting, we were discussing an issue, and Nacho, I think, just said, "Oh, hey, Austin, can you take a stab and look at this?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure. Like, you trust me to do that? That's awesome." And so that was kind of a good, like, a sign of good faith and confidence. And then you kind of go from there. It's like, okay, now what can I do to help out? And so some of the things that we're trying to do to help out are push proposals upstream into the semantic conventions, make updates to the documentation to try to flatten that learning curve, so that you have specific examples on how to instrument on iOS, what maybe what this view controller is doing, or making a network request with URL session. These are very common patterns for iOS developers, and it makes it very easy if there's a snippet out there that you can just go grab and then tweak in your application. And so those are the types of contributions that we're trying to make. And in terms of like feedback for the SIGs, is I don't know, be less friendly. I don't have much feedback. It's been great. So
That's awesome. That's really great to hear. And in terms of like, I know you said like it's been a great experience so far. Do you have anything like that you'd want to improve, that you could see like maybe this could use a little tweak?
I don't know if it's an improvement, but finding that prior art is tough sometimes. And mostly because some of these are proposals that are ongoing. A lot of things are just marked experimental, and you don't know how experimental that thing is. And it's supposed to go, I think, experimental, beta, stable. There are 2 or 3 stages for every proposal or specification change, and so making sure that those signals are up to date. I think would be very useful and helpful as a proposal goes through the process. But that's just bookkeeping. So if you're joining and you're talking about things, that's something that if you just ask a question, someone would help you out very quickly as well.
Awesome.
But
Awesome.
if I can add one thing there, I think
Oh yeah, please.
Austin touches on something that took me a little bit to kind of get used to as we started working with OpenTelemetry, which is it does take a bit longer than you would normally expect to get contributions accepted and move through that process like Austin is talking about. But I think one thing to be aware of is that is by design. And I think when you're used to working, like we're at a startup. And so for us, we try to make really quick decisions, that concept of one-way versus two-way doors, and implement them and see what happens. And so working in a community like this, it does take more consensus because we want obviously the goal of this is to be a unified solution that anyone can come use. And by design, that means decisions take a little longer than you might be used to coming into this as someone that's new. And so I think that's just something to be aware of, but realize that that is part of what it means to create a standard that anyone can come in and use and really understand and is thoroughly vetted. So that's something that people should probably be aware of there.
Yeah, that's actually a really great call out, and thanks for pointing that out. So we're finished now with the main questions portion. So does anyone from our audience have questions that they would like to ask? Yes, Paige.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm really curious what learning resources you would recommend if it was a particular blog or metaphor or tutorial that helped have that aha moment for you both. And then the kind of follow-up is any helpful metaphors that you use for teaching your customers and kind of end users.
Paige, real quick, before we answer that, can you tell us just who you are and what your role is?
Yeah, let me come on. Hello, I'm Paige Cruz. I work as a principal developer advocate over at Chronosphere. I used to be an SRE, mostly focused on those beautiful backend systems, the microservices running in beautiful air-conditioned data centers. And so I'm looking to learn more about mobile. I'm very interested in making sure observability is useful for everybody up and down the stack. And mobile is a area that I need to brush up on, and y'all are the experts, so I was here to learn.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to make sure I knew who I was talking to, so appreciate that. Actually, it's funny that you mentioned blogs and books and resources. It is required reading at Embrace, the Learning OpenTelemetry book. We literally have that. Oh, you can't see it now, but because my background, but by Ted Young and Austin Parker.
Awesome.
We've started a book club around that at Embrace. This is everyone in the company. And I think it addresses, particularly in mobile, one of the other challenges that we face that's not technical, which is when you think about observability concepts in OpenTelemetry, it's been primarily focused on backend to date. And so taking those concepts and introducing them to front-end and mobile developers and mobile teams and why they're important and end-to-end observability as a whole is a challenge. So before we can even get them to start implementing our solutions or understanding or helping them understand why they're important, they need to understand the fundamental concepts first. And so before we can help them with that, we need to understand those as well. And so in our journey over the last 9 months, it's been various levels of education through our entire org, not just myself and Austin, who are involved deeply in the SDKs, but our CSM teams, our go-to-market teams, our SDRs, all of them, so we can all kind of speak the same language and understand the benefits of OpenTelemetry, not just for backend observability, but for client side and mobile as well. Austin, I don't know if you have other ones. Oh, and we attend a bunch of conferences too. So that's great. Just being in the same space as people and learning what they're going through has been super helpful.
Yeah, I can't remember like when it clicked, but I think I'm a very visual person and a very hands-on learner. And so I think it probably the first time I saw a trace as a trace tree, like a visualized out in a timeline, I think that's when it was just like, oh, this is my code running right now, and I can see it, and I can see the differences here. If I'm comparing two that should be identical, but aren't because of stuff. That's when it was like, oh, okay, this is interesting and useful.
Awesome. Does anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, I was curious. Austin, I think you were talking about, a lot of the challenges with the mobile environment just being chaotic and, a lot of things being out of control. And I think related to that, you mentioned the data model for crash events. And I was just kind of curious, like what's going on like with all that? Like, are you like, yeah, what's in development and kind of what are the current topics in that area?
So it was Open Telemetry Day this week, so I didn't attend the client SIG this week because most people were in person. But the latest I heard, which would be as of last week, 9 days ago, the proposal is up in the GitHub repo, and the PR has been made, I believe, and maybe it's just in a Google Doc, but there's a document shared that describes a crash report as an event. The big thing, events are built on top of logs and log records. Hanson's in chat. He says proposal not up and PR not up yet, but soon, winky face. So Hanson knows. So yeah, we're discussing, and there will be a proposal very soon to use an event. Events are built on logs, but the key difference is there's an event.name attribute that you can key off of, and so the value of that attribute is meant to represent kind of the schema of the log body, and then I think also the other attributes in that log record. And so if you start calling an event with a name, this is a client crash, then the body can take a shape that is a little more formal. And what's interesting and what we're kind of working through is not all crash reports are the same. In a mobile environment, on Android, you have the JVM, which is the Java virtual machine, and that runtime. Then there's the native crashes below that, and those are mostly like C++ crash reports. iOS, you have Swift crash reports. There's some C++ crash reports that are kind of weird. And then we have these hybrid apps, React Native, and the others that are interesting because you might get two crash reports and two stack traces for a single crash, and there's some weirdness there just because if a React Native crashes, it might crash at the bridge layer or in the JavaScript, and then it throws an exception down to the native code. And so you want to capture kind of all of this stuff, and it's very different. And so part of what's going into the proposal is, okay, how do we represent this in a format that's consumable, but also understand that it can be very different. And when an OTel collector receives this data, how should they start even trying to parse this out? And so definitely recommend checking out the proposal as soon as it's up. Sorry, Hanson, for putting the pressure on you, but we're looking forward to it because it's one of the biggest things that when we came into OTel, we kind of asked ourselves, well, how are we going to represent crashes? And we struggled with that, but we found a way. We just kind of shove everything in as a log record right now, and we're like, this isn't good enough. This could be better. Let's try to make this better.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I guess I didn't think about, these were things like low battery as being something that would affect my apps. Of course, I just, like you said, stupid app and not, yeah, so.
Well, and low battery is one where the systems will start throttling the processor. So instead of a lot of mobile devices now, there are these high efficiency processor cores, and then the AI crazy fast processor cores. And so when the system sees that the battery is getting low, it starts throttling things and pushing things to those high efficiency CPUs. And so that has a downstream effect of your logic is now less performant because it's either bottlenecked and waiting behind something, or just the processor is slower. It's just naturally not as quick as it would if it was, charging or having a full battery.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm sure I'll have more questions once I've processed this more, but yeah, this is good.
Thanks for the question.
Awesome.
Oh, no problem.
Well, as we prepare to wrap up, we will turn the tables and allow you to ask us questions.
Okay, I'm curious. I think, Paige, Reese, I think both of you are, I think Reese, you're a developer relations engineer, Paige, you work as an SRE. To the other attendees as well, I'm not sure exactly your roles, but I'd be curious to what extent mobile observability is part of your current observability practice, and how that fits in, or how you marry that with your backend observability that you have in place.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I don't personally monitor any mobile applications. And I work with Adriana in the end user SIG, and just, anecdotally having heard a lot of end users being interested in this space, like Paige, I want to learn more about it because I just don't really know much about mobile observability, and I'm really interested.
Yeah, honestly, I think it was learning that Embrace existed kind of, I'm like, oh, of course you'd want to do like observability for your mobile applications as well. So that was, honestly,
Yeah.
it wasn't until that was when I made the mental connection of like, duh, we should, but why aren't we talking about it? So I see this as an opportunity also to like really bring awareness to folks that of course you should be doing observability for your mobile apps.
Yeah, that triggers. You said something earlier that I meant that noted down for this question section. What tactics have you found work best in that regard? So, for instance, we have deep expertise in mobile. We've just started working in OpenTelemetry just like over the last like 6 to 9 months, and we want to bring that mobile expertise to the OpenTelemetry community. But I think there's a thing around education from the mobile perspective that we also have to do that I think relate to a lot of the questions that we've talked about today. What have you guys found, tactics that you guys have found to be particularly impactful in that regard, whether it's something you guys have done or you've seen done, in terms of just educating others on the kind of nuances of, for us, it'll be mobile, but it can be whatever platform, right? Or it could be OpenTelemetry or whatever. Would be interested to hear about that.
I would say like talks, blogs. Yeah, I mean, apply to talk at conferences. That'll bring awareness for sure. Blog posts, YouTube videos, get on people's podcasts. Is another way to just bring that awareness.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of the other folks have any additional thoughts.
For me, it was really eye-opening. At an org, we sent all of our application data to the same observability platform. And I was mostly focused on the kind of web side. And I just for funsies looked at the mobile side just to see what's going on there, just poking around. And I saw, oh my God, like 90% of our requests came in through our iOS and Android apps. And I was like, I should just honestly ignore the website because to the business, the impact would be so much greater if we were to make these optimizations. And that business observability is not always talked about inside org. So really, even just asking folks, what's the split between entry points from mobile versus web? That can really be a thread to start pulling on. And then you also get your managers and other parts of the business like PMs also interested and invited to the party. And then the last thing is at SRECon this year, I posted a link in the chat. Isabel gave a great talk called The Invisible Front Door, Reliability Gaps in the Front End, and touched a bit on mobile monitoring and how SREs really need to turn our eye towards this space. So
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
That's great. Thanks, Paige. Well, we are almost out of time, so I thank you, Austin and Eliab, for joining us today. This has been really great, really educational, and thank you everyone who joined us as well. See you for OTel in practice.